Okay, so this is now recorded. So again, class, this morning we'll be talking on parametric and non-parametric test. So this is still, class, in relation to what we have known in our previous lesson on hypothesis testing and our lesson class on hypothesis test for normality. So the hypothesis test class for normality, it is a prerequisite lesson before we can proceed with using parametric or non-parametric test, because one of the criteria, class, for us to use the parametric test is that the data must be at least normally distributed. So if the data, class, is not normally distributed, then it should be greater than or equal to 30, or it should be, class, larger in number before we can use the parametric test. Okay, so here are our learning objectives for this morning. Firstly is that you should be able, class, to gain an understanding of what parametric and non-parametric tests are all about. So you should be able, class, to differentiate, or you should be able to express what parametric tests are and what is non-parametric tests. At the same time, class, you should be able to know when to use parametric and non-parametric tests. At the same time, you should be able, class, to identify what are those statistical tools intended for parametric test and what are its non-parametric equivalent. So for class, other questions with regards to our learning objectives. Now, I'd like to know, class, if these terms, parametric and non-parametric test, seem familiar on you, or have you ever, class, encountered this term in your research subject about talking on parametric and non-parametric test? Was it introduced, class, in your research subject? Class, discussing parametric and non-parametric test? Or what's your idea about parametric and non-parametric test? Or these terms are completely strange on you? Class, na-discuss ni? Or do you have any background about parametric and non-parametric test? How about Ava? Okay, so last lesson, na-discuss daw ang parametric and non-parametric test according to Princess Lara. Okay, so just to recall, class, so for this morning, we'll be talking, class, purely on parametric and non-parametric test. We are going to build our understanding, class, on what are or when to use parametric test and when to use non-parametric test, as well as identifying, class, what are those statistical tools intended for parametric at the same time for non-parametric test. So let's start first, class, with parametric test. So with the word, class, parametric, what do you think is the root word in this word? If you're tasked, class, to identify the root word for the word parametric, what will it be? Cheska, do you have any idea? Unsa kay root words from the word parametric? Okay, meter. Then we have here the prefix and suffix para and IC. So that comes the word build ang word nga parametric. So also, class, we can also from the word parametric, we can also form the word parameters. So with the word, class, parameters, mean to say, class, there are certain rules and criteria that must be satisfied before we can use these type of statistical tools. So mean to say, class, it has their own guideline. They have their own specific guideline when we can use this parametric test. So it is not just purely selecting, but we have to identify first whether our set of data satisfy all these conditions. Otherwise, class, if our data doesn't satisfy with the conditions as set in the parametric test, then we would go for non-parametric test. Okay? So muna nagtawag siya parametric because it has some criteria. It has some set of rules governing the set of data to be used with parametric test. For example, one of these criteria class is that the data should at least be normally distributed. Okay? So with that class, with that given criteria, how do we know whether our data follows a normal distribution? Class, how do we know if our data follows a normal distribution? Any idea from Shello? Calves? Shello, do you have any idea? How do we know whether our data follows a normal distribution or not? Okay, how about from Princess Lara?
Hypothesis test, sir?
Yes, we can perform. One thing that we can do, class, to check whether our data follows a normal distribution is that we will perform the hypothesis test for normality. What else? Kim? Aside from performing, class, the hypothesis test for normality, how do we, what are some other methods that we can check or that we can use to check whether our data follows a normal distribution? Kim?
The hypothesis test.
Okay, performing a hypothesis test. So in addition, class, for performing a hypothesis test for normality, we can also use the histogram. Okay, do you still remember, class, the histogram? So the histogram will tell us the distribution of our data. If your histogram, class, shaped like a bell curve, mean to say, class, the data is at least normally distributed. So you can either graph your data or you can perform, class, a hypothesis test for normality to check whether your data follows a normal distribution. Subten, class, do you have questions on how to check that your data is at least normally distributed? Again, class, you may either perform the hypothesis test for normality or you can graph your data with a histogram to check its distribution. Then second criteria, class, is that your variable or your data, class, should be interval or ratio. So mean to say, class, it should be in this, your data should be measured in terms of interval, scale, or ratio. If your data, class, is nominal and or ordinal data or ordinal variable, therefore you cannot use the parametric test. Can you give me, class, an example of interval or ratio variables? Something mga interval and ratio variables. Or let's do this the other way around. I'm going to give you a variable, then I'd like you, class, to identify whether it's interval, ratio, nominal, or ordinal. Okay? So let's start, class, with this example. If I have class, gender, in which scale of measurement does gender fall? Is it nominal, ordinal, ratio, or interval? Gender, Thomas. Thomas, is it nominal, ordinal, ratio, or interval? Silent Mrs. Thomas. How about Shello? In what scale of measurement does gender belongs? Is it nominal, ordinal, ratio, or interval? What's your idea, Shello? So, let's try to recall class kung saan ng nominal, ordinal, ratio, and interval. So, when you say class nominal, mean to say class, this type of variable is categorical. So, it contains some category. But then class, its characteristic is that in a nominal variable, all the categories are of the same rank. So, we cannot say class that one category is higher than the other because they are of the same level. Okay, so the same ang category. The same ang levels class sa category for nominal variable. So, whereas class, when you say ordinal, so just try class with a nominal variable, an ordinal variable class also contains categories. But then, its difference is that in an ordinal variable, the categories class are ranked in some way. So, in which class, one category is higher than the other. Okay, so let's go back class with our example. Gender. Okay, so gender class normally takes the value of male or female. Okay, so with that example, can we say class that gender is nominal or ordinal? Okay, from Lara, she says that it's nominal because class male and female, we are of the same ranks. Okay, how about class if we say your sectioning class in Vishu Integrated High School, in which level of measurement does it belong? Your section, class sections class in Vishu Integrated High School. Like for example, we have here for grade 9, we have diamond and emerald. How do you classify the sectioning? Is it nominal or ordinal? Class, ang inyong sectioning, how do we classify you? Is it ordinal or nominal? Kim?
Nominal, sir.
Okay, that's nominal because ang atong sectioning class is heterogeneous. So, na-mix na ng inyong, you are not assigned a section based on your GPA, but you were assigned randomly. So, we are considering class heterogeneous sectioning. So, that's nominal. How about class if I say economic status of people? Economic status. How do you classify that one? Cheska? Is it nominal or ordinal? Economic status. Okay, that's economic status class. Iba naman tayo average, below average, above average, then nadyo yung mga elites. Okay? So, in ana class, so nasa specific ranking. So, of course, katong poor, they are ang income class nga below average, mean to say nadyo sila sa ubos, nasa hierarchy. So, in that case, we could say class that economic status that is measured in terms of ordinal scale of measurement. That's ordinal class ang economic status. How about class if I say the performance of teachers? Excellent, excellent, outstanding, satisfactory, above satisfactory, or below satisfactory? Teaching performance of instructors. How do you classify that one? Is it nominal or ordinal? Sai, what's your answer? Okay, that's ordinal. So it is measured class in ordinal scale. Pero again class, with those examples of variable, we cannot use parametric test because again, they are not interval or ratio. For example class, if I say amount of money, how do you classify that one? Is it interval or ratio? The amount of money you have in your pocket, is it interval or ratio? Hello? Amount of money, is it interval class or ratio? Thomas, amount of money that you have in your pocket, is it measured in interval or ratio scale? Okay. How about Princess Lara?
Ratio, sir.
Okay, that's ratio. Anong ratio man? Because class, if you don't really have money in your pocket, so that means 0 or it means nothing. So, in ratio scale class, 0 really means nothing. So, wala siya value dyan. So, kung wala kay kwarta, wala dyan kay kwarta. So, how about class IQ? Where can we classify your IQ level? Interval or ratio?
Interval, sir.
Okay, that's interval because it doesn't mean class kung ubusin mong IQ, it doesn't mean nga wala jud kay knowledge. It's only nga wala lang siya na measure sa based on the criteria lagi set sa IQ test or wala lang siya na measure based sa exam ay mong gitake. Okay, so nga na siya. How about class ang temperature? How do you classify temperature? Is it ratio or interval? For example, if I have class 0 degrees Celsius, temperature measured class in Celsius, is it interval or ratio? Temperature, Cheska. Is it interval or ratio? Okay, so, ang temperature class, say for example, if we say class 0 degrees Celsius, ang 0 degrees Celsius doesn't really mean no temperature. And perhaps class, when you convert 0 degrees Celsius, converted class to Kelvin, equivalent na siya to 273 Kelvin. So, mean to say class, ang 0 doesn't mean nothing. It has a value. Therefore, in that example class, ang example nga temperature class is measured in interval scale. So again class, bisan pag may nga 0 degrees Fahrenheit, it doesn't mean nga wala kay temperature reading. Nagapon kay temperature reading is only nga dili lang siya mabasa sa scale nga gigamit nimo. For example, ang imong degree Celsius, di ba tama naman siya sa 0. So dili na siya mabasa lower than 0. So perhaps class kung imo siya convert to Kelvin, that's equivalent to 273 Kelvin. So in temperature class, 0 doesn't mean nothing. Na siya value. So sometimes class ang ratio in terms class of ratio, mean to say class 0 really means nothing. Wala siya value. Pero with interval, 0 has a value. So muna siya. Again class, with parametric test, your variable should be at least normally distributed, and it should be measured class in terms of interval or ratio. And then for example class, you conduct your survey and then you ask your respondents to rate your for example to taste your product, and then i-rate nila imong product ang taste from scale of 1 to 5. Okay, ilang i-rate class ang yung product from scale of 1 to 5. Now, with that given situation, can we use parametric test for that problem or for that survey to analyze your data? If i-rate nimo class from 1 to 5, can we use parametric test for that survey to analyze your data? Okay, let's hear from Princess Lara. Princess Lara, can we use parametric test for that problem? You ask your respondents to rate your product from 1 to 5 and then you want to analyze your data. Can we use parametric test for that? So team answer, Princess Lara. Is it a yes or no?
Yes, I think, sir.
Okay, yes, imuha. How about Kim?
I don't think so, sir.
So you say no. Okay, how about from Saya? Sai, what's your answer? Is it a yes or no? So to Sai? Yes or no?
Yes, siguro, sir.
Okay, yes. Imo Cheska?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So, about Shello and Thomas? Is it a yes or no? So, let's just call class your product from Thomas, yes. And then si Shello. Okay, wala pa next. So, this is Shello. Now, let's just take class, the name of the variable there is product rating. So because product rating class, because you ask your respondents to rate your product. For example, nag-bake kag cookie. And then you want to know class kung whether ang taste niya based sa perception sa imong respondents is very good siya or needs improvement with a rating scale of 1 to 5. So in that instance, can we tell class that our variable is measured in terms of interval or ratio? Okay? So, you might argue class nga it's interval or ratio because giparate man siya nimo og rating scale nga 1 to 5. And 1 to 5 are all numbers and then they could be class measured as ratio. But then by the fact class that it has a rating scale of 1 to 5 with 1 with the lowest value and 5 with the highest value, mean to say class na siya ordering. There is some ordering class with the categories that you have. Ang category 1 is of course class lower than category 5. Okay, if you are going to rate 5 class, mean to say the product is outstanding. So mean to say class, dili siya ma-classify as ratio variable. Therefore, ari siya mabutang class sa ordinal variable. Since ordinal variable man siya, here comes now your non-parametric test. Okay? Nasabtan class? So, kung imong variable class is ordinal or nominal, you cannot use parametric test. Okay? So, here comes now soon ang concept class about non-parametric test. So one good thing class about non-parametric test is that they can be used for nominal, ordinal, ratio, and interval variables. So muna siya pangtanan. Okay? So tanan nga variable nga data types are suitable class for non-parametric test. So again, with a non-parametric test, this is an alternative tool if the parametric test is not applicable. At the same time, it can be used class for nominal, ordinal, ratio, and interval variables. So again class, I tell you that not all the time that whether it's katong kanina nga giparate nimo sa 1 to 5, dili siya maklasify as ratio because again naman siya ordering, with 1 with the lowest value and 5 with the highest value. Pero for example, class, ingani, ang color coding. 1 ang yellow, 2 ang green, 3 ang red. How do you classify that one? Is it interval or ratio? Or interval, ratio, nominal, or ordinal? Napa-color coding ka. Kung ang color niya is yellow, that's 1. Kung red, 2. Kung green, 3. Is it nominal, ordinal, ratio, or interval? Naka-coding class, imo i-code ang 1 kay yellow, 2 for red, then 3 for green. Usa ka na siya nga level of measurement, nominal, ordinal, ratio, or interval. Any idea? How about Kim?
More color coding na siya, sir?
Yes, like ang kung yung color is yellow, mo right ang respondent og 1, kung green 3, kung blue 2 yung answer.
I think nominal siya, sir.
Okay, that's nominal. So nominal lang sa class because wala man siya hierarchy. Okay? Wala man siya hierarchy, we just use numbers for coding. I-code na siya, plainly label. So in another way class, another way to say that one, we just use numbers to as labels. Wala siya specific ranking. Pero class, if you use numbers class for ranking, so that is now classified as ordinal. Okay? Pero if you say class, amount of rice consumed in 1 week or in a week, that's now a ratio. Because nasa value at the same time, kung 0 kilograms, so mean to say wala siya na-consume of rice for the entire week. Okay? So again class, if your variable class are ratio and interval, at the same time it follows a normal distribution, then you can use parametric test. Pero class, if your variables are ordinal, ratio, nominal, and interval, and then the class mo it doesn't follow a normal distribution, then you can go for non-parametric test. So for class, questions or clarifications when to use parametric and when to use non-parametric test. Sabtan class? Do you have any questions or clarifications? Class, questions so far or clarifications, if there are? Okay, so if there's none, class, let's now take a look on this table. The different types of analysis that we can do. At the same time, class, what are the statistical tool and its parametric and non-parametric equivalent. So let's start, class, with this type of analysis. This is a measure of association, or measure class of relationship. So how strong is the association between two variables? Okay, so you can imagine, class, like you wanted to know whether those students who performed well in math also performed well in English. So you want to compare, class, whether naba relationship ang grade sa English and grade in math. Okay, so in that way, you are trying to correlate two variables. And that's what we call, class, measure of association or measure of relationship. For the parametric test equivalent, we make use, class, of person correlation. For the non-parametric test equivalent, we will be using, class, non-parametric. We will be using Spearman rank correlation coefficient. Okay. Questions, class, on measure, class, of association for both parametric and non-parametric test. Again, class, this type of analysis is useful kung mag-correlate ka og duha ka variable. Like kanina, imo i-correlate, class, ang grade in math and grade in English kung whether imo hypothesis is that those students who performed well in English also performed well in mathematics. That's your hypothesis, and then you wanted to know whether your hypothesis, class, is correct. So mo na nga time that you will perform, class, your hypothesis testing. Mag-data gathering na ka, then analyze ka data, and then of course, you will make your conclusion, whether your hypothesis is correct or not. Questions class or clarifications about measures class of association for parametric and non-parametric test. Then another type of analysis class that we have is comparing the mean of one group against the assumed mean. For example, class, you try to assume, okay, so you have a hypothesis stating that the GPA of grade 9 students is 93. Okay, so you were very specific nga imong hypothesis is that the GPA of grade 9 students is 93. Okay, ang average. The average grade for grade 9 students is 93. So in that case, you are performing here comparing the mean of one group against the assumed mean. Ang assumed mean dito class is that the grade 9 students have an average of 93. Ang assumed mean dito is 93 kay mao man ang imong gi-assume nga average for the entire grade 9 students. And that's comparison of one mean or one sample t-test for parametric test, and then for non-parametric test, we make use class of sign test. Okay? But then class, next natong comparison is that we are now comparing class two groups. Like for example, you will say class that the GPA of the grade 9 diamond is equal to the GPA of grade 9 emerald. So in this example class, you are now comparing two groups. Since it involves class two groups, for parametric test, you can use independent sample t-test, and then for non-parametric test, you can make use class of Mann-Whitney U-test. And it's also otherwise known class as Wilcoxon rank sum test. Okay, so mo ni ang statistical tool nga pwede gamiton if mag-compare ka sa mean sa duha ka groups, either for parametric independent sample t-test, kung non-parametric class make use of Mann-Whitney U-test or Wilcoxon rank sum test. And then second to the last is that we have here class comparing the means for two related groups. So in this example class, we still studying class two sets of data. But then class with related groups mean to say class the data, the two sets of data is taken from the same group. Usually class before and after nga study. Like for example, you wanted to test class the efficacy of your fertilizer before and after applying class this fertilizer on your plant. So you wanted to know whether effective ba nga fertilizer or dili. So before putting the fertilizer, imong i-measure ang growth sa imong plants. That's your first nga study. Then second mong study, using the same variant of seeds, imong applyan siya fertilizer, and then you are going to measure ang growth sa imong plants. Then imo i-compare before applying fertilizer and after applying fertilizer. Mo siya i-compare kung ni-increase ba ang growth performance. When nagtawag class og two related groups. Another example class is that you wanted to test whether makatabang ba ang energy drink sa performance sa athletes. Like day 1, imo sang gipa-duwa diha without energy drink. Then pag day 2, still the same set of respondents, imo sang gipaduwa diha. This time imo na sang gipainom og energy drink. Then imong gi-measure silang performance, whether na-improve ba ilang performance or wala. That's related groups. And then again for parametric test, we will be using class paired sample t-test, and then for non-parametric test, we'll be using Wilcoxon sign rank test. And then lastly class, if you're going to compare 3 or more groups, like you wanted to compare class ang performance sa Garnet, Ruby, and Sapphire sa previous na sectioning sa ilahang GPA, whether we have the same GPA across grade 9 Ruby, Sapphire, and Garnet. So in that case class, we are now comparing 3 or more groups. So since dili na since class ang paired sample and independent sample are only limited for 2 groups, then we can no longer use these tools. Instead, for parametric test, we can make use class of ANOVA, and then for non-parametric test, we can make use class of Kruskal-Wallis test. Now, this tools class may seem so strange with you. Don't get overwhelmed class with this statistical tool, because we are going to go through with each of these statistical tools class one by one. So, ang purpose ani nga class na slide is for you to be aware unsa ni mga types of test that we will be performing in this subject. So, firstly, we'll be discussing class on measures of association for both parametric and non-parametric. Then mean for one group, the mean for 2 groups, mean for 3 groups, and then comparing the means of 3 or more groups. So, questions so far, class, or clarifications? Class, are there questions about parametric and non-parametric test?